My son spread both arms across the doorway and looked at me as though I were the stranger. "Dad," he said quietly, "you're not coming in." For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. Behind him, I could hear laughter. Glasses clinked together. My granddaughter, Lily, ran across the living room wearing the blue dress Eleanor and I had bought for her birthday. She caught sight of me through the gap beside Ethan's shoulder and waved with both hands. "Grandpa." Before she could reach me, Ethan stepped farther into the doorway. "Go back inside, sweetheart." She frowned, but obeyed. I looked at my son for several long seconds. "You're stopping me from seeing my own family?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's better this way." I nodded once. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned around, walked back to my truck, and drove away. Halfway home, I pulled into an empty parking lot overlooking the Columbia River. For 35 years, everyone had called me the nicest man they knew. That afternoon, I decided I was finished being nice. My name is Thomas Bennett. I'm 70 years old, and until 18 months ago I worked as a senior building inspector for the city of Portland. My entire career was spent telling people the truth about structures, even when they didn't want to hear it. If a building wasn't safe, I shut it down. If corners had been cut, I wrote the report, signed my name, and accepted whatever angry phone calls followed. Funny how I could protect complete strangers for 40 years, but never realized how much damage I was allowing inside my own family. Before I tell you why my own son blocked me from walking through his front door, tell me where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. My wife, Eleanor, and I have been married for 44 years. She's the kind of woman who still writes birthday cards by hand and somehow remembers every anniversary, every favorite dessert, every little promise people forget they ever made. We have one son, Ethan, 36, and one granddaughter, Lily, who has somehow inherited every bit of kindness her father left behind. If you'd asked me 2 years earlier whether we were a happy family, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have told you yes. I would have been completely wrong. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment everything started to change. It wasn't the day Ethan blocked the doorway. It wasn't even the first lie he told. It was the day I convinced myself that helping him one more time would fix everything. 3 years earlier, Ethan called me just after midnight. "Dad, I need a favor." No parent likes hearing those words after dark. I found him sitting alone in his truck outside an unfinished condominium project on the east side of Portland. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was stuffed into the passenger seat, and for the first time since he was a teenager, he looked scared. "The investors are pulling out," he admitted. "If they walk away, the bank calls the loan. I'll lose everything." "How much?" He stared through the windshield before answering. $200,000. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. He quickly explained that cash flow had dried up, material costs had doubled, and buyers were canceling contracts faster than new ones were signing. He insisted it was temporary. "I just need a few months." I didn't have $200,000. What I did have was nearly every dollar Eleanor and I had spent 44 years saving for retirement. The next morning, I sat across from Eleanor at our kitchen table and told her everything. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she folded her hands and asked one simple question. "If we save him today, what will he learn tomorrow?" I didn't have an answer. Instead, I told her what every father tells himself. He's our son. 2 weeks later, we refinanced part of our home and emptied most of our investment account. Ethan cried when I handed him the cashier's check. "I'll pay every penny back." I believed him. Not because he had a plan. Because I wanted to. The project survived. Everyone praised Ethan for turning his business around. The local newspaper even ran a story calling him one of Portland's rising entrepreneurs. My name wasn't mentioned once. It never bothered me. Seeing my son succeed was enough. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. A few months later, Ethan bought a new luxury SUV. Then came a vacation in Italy. Then a bigger office. Every time Eleanor noticed another expensive purchase, she'd quietly look at me without saying a word. She didn't need to. I already knew what she was thinking. Our retirement savings had disappeared. His lifestyle hadn't. I just wasn't ready to admit what that really meant. Over the next year, I noticed something that bothered me more than the money ever had. Ethan no longer asked for help. He simply expected it. When Lily needed a private preschool, I quietly paid the tuition after Ethan mentioned how expensive it was. When their furnace failed during a snowstorm, I covered the replacement before the installers even arrived. When Claire wanted to renovate their kitchen before hosting Thanksgiving, Ethan laughed and said, "Dad likes helping. It makes him happy." He said it like it was a compliment. It wasn't. The strange part was that Claire always thanked me. Ethan never did. I told myself that was just how sons were. Busy. Distracted. Comfortable around their fathers. Then little things started happening that I couldn't explain. One Sunday, Eleanor invited everyone over for dinner. She spent the entire afternoon making Lily's favorite homemade lasagna. An hour before they were supposed to arrive, Ethan texted. Something came up. Rain check. No apology. No phone call. Just 6 words. I watched Eleanor quietly wrap the untouched food into containers for the freezer. She smiled while she worked. But I'd been married to her long enough to recognize the difference between a smile and disappointment. A month later, we drove across town to watch Lily perform in her elementary school music recital. There were empty seats beside Ethan and Claire. When Eleanor started walking toward them, Ethan stood up quickly and met us halfway down the aisle. "Dad, Mom, I already promised these seats to Claire's parents." He didn't even sound embarrassed. We ended up sitting 5 rows behind complete strangers. After the recital, Lily ran into Eleanor's arms. "Grandma, did you see me?" We wouldn't have missed it for anything. Then Lily looked confused. "Why weren't you sitting with us?" Before either of us could answer, Ethan called her away for family pictures. Not our family. His. That night, Eleanor stared out the kitchen window while washing dishes. "Do you ever feel," she asked softly, "like we're becoming guests in our own family?" I wanted to tell her she was imagining it. Instead, I remembered every canceled dinner, every forgotten birthday, every time Ethan had introduced Claire's parents as the family, while we stood a few feet away. I was still trying to convince myself these were isolated moments. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, an envelope arrived in our mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ethan standing beside a large construction site, shaking hands with 3 investors. Across the bottom, someone had written in black marker, "Ask your son whose signature is on the inspection reports." For the first time, helping my son didn't feel like kindness. It felt like I had been protecting something dangerous. I didn't tell Eleanor about the photographs that night. Not because I wanted to keep secrets from my wife, because I wasn't ready to believe it myself. The next morning, I drove to the construction site printed on the back of the photo. It was a 12-story apartment complex overlooking the Willamette River, the kind of project that ends up on magazine covers if everything goes right. The security guard recognized me before I even introduced myself. "Mr. Bennett?" I nodded. "I've seen your name on all the inspection reports." My stomach tightened. "You have?" He pointed toward the temporary office trailer. "They're inside if you want copies." Inside the trailer, framed permits covered one wall, fire safety approvals, foundation certifications, structural inspections. Every single document carried my name, my professional license number, and what looked like my signature. I stared at them for nearly a minute. The signature wasn't mine. It was close enough to fool someone who had never watched me sign a document. But I had signed thousands of inspection reports during my career. I knew every curve of my own handwriting. A young project manager walked over with a smile. "It's an honor to finally meet you, Mr. Bennett. Ethan says you personally reviewed every phase of the project." I looked at him. "I've never been here before." The smile disappeared from his face. "What?" "I retired 18 months ago." Silence filled the trailer. Then he slowly reached for one of the permit folders and began flipping through the pages again, this time with a very different expression. I left without saying another word. By the time I reached my truck, my phone was ringing. It was Ethan. "Dad, were you just at Riverside Heights?" "I was." "You shouldn't have gone there." I noticed my signature on several documents. There was a long pause. Finally he sighed. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." "I can't explain over the phone." "When?" "I'll come by this evening." "No," I replied calmly. "I'll come to you." His voice sharpened immediately. "Tonight isn't a good night." Why not? We're having dinner with investors. I almost said I'd only stay for 5 minutes. Instead, I simply answered, tomorrow then. We hung up. That evening, I showed Eleanor the anonymous photograph. She read the handwritten message twice before placing it back on the table. Then she looked at me and asked the one question I had been trying to avoid all day. Thomas, how many times have you protected Ethan from the consequences of his own choices? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because, for the first time, I wasn't counting the times I'd helped my son. I was wondering how many lies my kindness had allowed to grow. The following evening, I drove to Ethan's house 15 minutes before dinner. The neighborhood was lined with luxury homes, each one larger than the last. Expensive SUVs filled the driveway. Through the front windows, I could see men in tailored suits laughing over glasses of wine while their wives admired the view from the patio. These weren't friends. They were investors. The same investors who believed I had personally approved Ethan's apartment project. I walked to the front door and rang the bell. Claire answered first. Her smile disappeared the instant she saw my face. Thomas, is Ethan here? Before she could answer, Ethan appeared behind her. The moment he noticed the folder tucked under my arm, every bit of color drained from his face. We need to talk, I said calmly. He stepped outside and quietly closed the front door behind him. Not now. It won't take long. He glanced back through the glass at his guests. I said not now. I took a slow breath. These documents have my forged signature on them, Ethan. I think that deserves 5 minutes. His jaw tightened. Then he did something I never imagined my own son would do. He stepped directly in front of the doorway and stretched both arms across it. Dad, you're not coming inside. Time seemed to stop. I looked past him and saw Lily setting plates on the dining table. She smiled the moment she noticed me. Grandpa. She started running toward the entrance. Claire gently caught her hand before she reached the door. It's okay, sweetheart. Grandpa has to leave. Lily looked confused. But he always eats with us. My heart broke in a way I cannot fully describe. Not because my son had embarrassed me. Because my granddaughter was watching him do it. I looked Ethan in the eyes. Are you protecting your guests? I asked quietly. Or are you protecting your lies? His face hardened. You don't understand what's at stake. No, I replied. I understand exactly what's at stake. For years, I'd stood between him and every consequence he deserved. I'd paid his debts, defended his mistakes, protected his reputation. And standing there in his doorway, I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. My kindness hadn't made Ethan a better man. It had simply made him believe someone else would always clean up after him. I nodded once. You're right. He frowned. This conversation doesn't belong here. I turned around without another word. No argument. No shouting. No dramatic threat. Just silence. As I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Don't leave. They deserve to hear the truth. Attached was a screenshot of an email Ethan had sent to his investors 3 months earlier. At the bottom was one sentence that made my hands go cold. My father has already approved everything. He just doesn't know I used his name yet. I sat behind the steering wheel for nearly a minute. Then, instead of driving home, I called the one person Ethan had spent years convincing everyone not to trust. My former supervisor at the city's building safety division. And I finally stopped protecting my son. My former supervisor, Michael Harris, answered on the second ring. Thomas? It's been a while. It has, I said. I need you to meet me at Riverside Heights. Tonight. He heard something in my voice. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He arrived with 2 investigators from the city's building safety division. They weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to verify whether official documents had been falsified. I handed Michael the anonymous photograph, the forged inspection reports, and the email screenshot. He looked at the signature. Then at me. I've seen your signature for 30 years. He didn't need another second. This isn't yours. Within an hour, the investors' dinner had come to a complete stop. No shouting. No dramatic accusations. Just quiet questions that Ethan couldn't answer. One investor walked outside carrying a permit folder. Mr. Bennett, he asked, did you personally approve this project? I looked him straight in the eye. No. That single word changed everything. The following weeks moved faster than I expected. The building's safety division suspended the project, while every inspection was reviewed. The investors filed civil claims against Ethan's company after discovering they had relied on documents bearing a forged signature. His business partners withdrew. The banks froze additional funding. Claire learned the truth at the same time everyone else did. She came to our house one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "I thought you were trying to control him," she whispered. "I didn't know you were the one who kept saving him." I simply nodded. I didn't know anymore either. A month later, Ethan knocked on our front door. This time, no one stood in the doorway. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of time. Because consequences have a way of aging people faster than birthdays. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know," I answered. He looked surprised. "You know?" "I know you're sorry you got caught." His eyes dropped to the porch. After a long silence, he finally admitted the words I had waited years to hear. "I kept thinking you'd always fix everything." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "For most of your life." "I did, and that was my mistake." We stood there for another moment before Eleanor called us inside for coffee. Forgiveness didn't happen that afternoon. Trust wasn't magically restored. Some things take years to rebuild. But for the first time in a very long time, my son walked through my front door with humility instead of entitlement. Looking back, I don't regret loving my son. I regret confusing love with rescue. Because the moment my son blocked the doorway was the moment I finally realized that the kindest thing a father can do is stop protecting his child from the consequences they created themselves. If you found yourself in my position, would you have continued protecting your son, or would you have done what I finally did? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.